She was standing at the altar in a room full of Korean Mafia men with guns under their suits. Wearing a white dress that wasn't hers, holding flowers she hadn't chosen, playing the fiancé of a man she had only met 48 hours ago. And she was fine with that. What she was not fine with. The moment the cathedral doors burst open, and another woman walked in wearing the exact same dress. A woman who looked at the man beside Oma like he was hers. A woman who looked at Oma like she was about to become a problem that needed to be permanently solved. The entire room went silent. 200 of Seoul's most dangerous men held their breath. And Omar Asante, a 26-year-old event planner from Accra, Ghana, who had absolutely no business being in this building, slowly turned to the man beside her, the man with the cold eyes and the jaw carved from marble and the hands that had held hers with surprising gentleness just the night before, and whispered through her teeth. "You have exactly 3 seconds to explain this before I cause an international incident." Park Jae-won didn't flinch. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear, and said the 4 words that changed everything. "Trust me. Please. Now." And God help her, she did. "Before we begin, my mum said this video cannot reach 10,000 views and 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. Smash that like button, subscribe right now, and drop in the comments where you are watching from. Now let's get into this story. The thing about Oma Asante was that she never panicked. She had planned 3 weddings during a blackout in Accra. She had managed a flower crisis at a billionaire's beach ceremony in Mombasa when the entire floral shipment fell into the ocean. She had once talked a mother of the bride off a literal ledge, not metaphorically, actually literally, in Cape Town, 20 minutes before the ceremony. Oma did not panic. Oma solved. Which was why, when she woke up in a luxury Seoul hotel suite with no memory of how she got there, wearing a silk robe that cost more than her rent, with a note on the pillow beside her that read, "Don't scream. I'll explain." JPW, she did not scream. She sat up. She looked around. She assessed. The suite was enormous, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a grey Seoul morning, cherry blossom petals pressed against the glass like they were also trying to figure out what was happening. A breakfast spread sat on the table that could have fed her entire family back home in Kumasi. And hanging on the back of the bathroom door, encased in a garment bag, was a wedding dress. A stunning, jaw-dropping, hand-beaded, couture wedding dress. Oma walked to it slowly, unzipped the bag, touched the fabric. It was the kind of dress that made women cry in bridal shops. It was the kind of dress Oma had helped other women into for years, smiling, adjusting, saying "You look perfect," while quietly filing away the small ache in her own chest. She looked at the tag inside the collar. Her name was written on it. Asante, A. "Okay," she said out loud to no one. "Okay. This is fine." It was not fine. 36 hours earlier, Oma had been on her first real vacation in 3 years. Seoul had been her gift to herself, a solo trip, a week of museums and street food and buying things she didn't need from Myeongdong Market. No clients. No emergencies. No being indispensable to everyone else while quietly falling apart from the inside. She had been sitting in a café in Insadong, eating a pastry that tasted like it had been made by angels, when the man sat down across from her. She hadn't invited him. She had looked up with every intention of delivering her finest "do not try it" expression, a look she had perfected over 26 years of being a woman moving through the world, and then her brain had simply buffered. He was unreasonably beautiful. That was the only way to describe it. Tall, even sitting. Sharp jaw, sharp cheekbones, sharp dark eyes that somehow looked both dangerous and exhausted at the same time. He was wearing a black suit that probably cost more than her flight, and he had the energy of a man who had not smiled in several years and had made peace with that fact. He looked at her like she was a solution to a problem he hadn't solved yet. "You're staring," Oma said, because she had no patience for people who didn't announce their intentions. "Yes," he agreed. Like that was a complete sentence. She put down her pastry. "Can I help you?" "I need a fiancé," he said. "For 48 hours. I will pay you $200,000, cover all expenses, and ensure your complete safety. I need someone who is not Korean, who is intelligent, who is quick under pressure." He paused. His eyes moved over her face with an attention that felt uncomfortably like being truly seen. You look like all three. Alma stared at him. Then she picked her pastry back up and took a very large bite. I'm on vacation, she said. I know. I've been watching you for 2 days. She pointed her pastry at him. That is wildly concerning, and you should know that. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. But almost. Like his face was remembering how to try. My name is Park Jae-won, he said. I run a business organization in Seoul. I am in a situation that requires a fiancé at a family event tomorrow. It is complicated. It is safe. And you, his gaze held hers steady and unblinking, would be compensated more for 2 days than most people earn in 2 years. Alma looked at him for a long time. $200,000. Her mother's medical bills. Her little brother's university fees. The studio she had been dreaming of opening for 4 years. What kind of business organization? She asked carefully. He looked at her steadily. The kind where my family does not ask questions. Alma understood immediately what that meant. She should have said no. She finished her pastry, wiped her hands on a napkin, and said, I want $250. And I want to see a contract. Park Jae-won reached into his jacket and placed a contract on the table. It was already made out for $250,000. He had known she would negotiate. Alma looked at the contract, then looked at him. Something moved in her chest, something she did not have the vocabulary for yet and absolutely did not trust. You have dangerous eyes, she told him, signing her name. Yes, he said again. Still a complete sentence. Still completely unsettling. She slid the contract back. Don't make me regret this, Park Jae-won. He folded the contract carefully and tucked it into his jacket, and this time, he actually smiled. It was catastrophic. It was the kind of smile that rearranged things. I already regret this, Alma thought, and followed him out into the Seoul morning. The car was black, long, and had tinted windows dark enough to hide a whole personality. There were 2 men in the front, large, quiet, with the specific stillness of people trained to be dangerous, and Alma sat in the back beside Park Jae-won with a very deliberate 6 inches of space between them. She was a professional. She had agreed to play a fiancé, not to actually become one. Rules, he said, as the car moved through Seoul traffic. I was about to say the same thing, Alma replied. She pulled a small notebook from her bag. She always had a notebook, occupational habit, and uncapped a pen. Go ahead. He glanced at the notebook. Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe. Or surprise. Like he hadn't expected her to be organized. Honey, she thought, I have planned weddings in war zones. You are not complicated. The event is a family wedding, he said. My cousin is being married. My family has been pressuring me to bring a partner for 2 years. I told them I was engaged. They want to meet her. And you don't have an actual fiancé. I had one, he said. We parted ways. Alma looked at him sideways. She ran. She made a different choice. Okay, that's a very diplomatic way to say she absolutely ran. Alma wrote something in her notebook. Continue. His jaw tightened, but he continued. My family is traditional. They will ask questions about our relationship, about how we met, about our plans. You need to be convincing. I am an event planner, Alma said. I perform under pressure for a living. What's our story? We met in London. You were planning an event I attended. We stayed in contact. I proposed 4 months ago. Where did you propose? He paused. Paris. Romantic, Alma said. Or trying to be. What restaurant? Another pause. I don't. Le Jules Verne, she said. Eiffel Tower. You made a reservation 6 weeks in advance because you're the kind of man who plans things and panicking is beneath you. The ring was a family piece. You had it resized. She looked up from her notebook. You're welcome. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't entirely decode. That's very specific, he said. That's my job, she said. Details make stories believable. Now, your family. How many people, and who do I need to be afraid of? You shouldn't be afraid of anyone. Park Jae-won. Oma gave him a look that she reserved for clients who were not being honest with her. You are a man who has bodyguards and who hired a stranger for a family event and who described your own business as the kind where my family doesn't ask questions. I was not born this morning. Tell me who I need to watch out for. A long silence. Then, my father. He will test you. How? He will say something in Korean that he assumes you won't understand. He assesses people by how they respond to feeling excluded. Smart, Oma said. What do you want me to do? Nothing. I'll translate. Or, Oma interrupted, I could learn 3 phrases in Korean tonight that will make him think I understand everything, create a little paranoia, and establish immediately that I am not someone to underestimate. Park Jae-won looked at her for a full 5 seconds. Yes, he said. Do that. Great. She wrote it down. Who else? My aunt. She will want to know about children. Oma clicked her pen closed. How many children are we planning to have? 2. 3, she countered. I'm a maximalist. It'll make her like me more. Fine. 3. Names. He looked genuinely caught off guard. I haven't. We should have names. Couples who are actually engaged have names. Also, she tilted her head, are we affectionate in public? Hand-holding? Casual touches? I need to know the physical vocabulary of this relationship so I don't do something weird. The air in the car shifted. He was quiet for a moment. And when he spoke, his voice was lower, more deliberate. My family would expect affection, yes. Okay, Oma said professionally. I can do hand-holding. Occasional leaning. Eye contact that suggests history. She paused. I draw the line at kissing. Unless it's a genuine emergency. Defined as. Someone's life is in danger. He nodded slowly. Agreed. Oma flipped to a new page. She was being professional. She was being excellent. She was also very aware of how warm he was sitting 6 inches away from her, and how his voice had done something unfair to her nervous system just then, and how this was going to be a significantly more challenging assignment than she had initially budgeted for. She wrote at the top of the new page, potential problems. Then, very small, at the bottom corner where no one would ever see it. Do not catch feelings. This is a job. You are a professional. He is a mafia boss. Do not. She underlined it 3 times. They spent that evening in the hotel suite, separate rooms. She had confirmed this immediately, going over the family tree, the wedding details, and their fabricated love story. He ordered food. Real food. Korean barbecue and jjajangmyeon and japchae, spread across the coffee table between them. You eat well, she observed, watching him move around the food with comfortable familiarity, placing the best pieces toward her side without seeming to notice he was doing it. I grew up eating well, he said. My mother cooked constantly. Grew up? Or past tense? A pause. She passed. 4 years ago. Oma looked at him. I'm sorry. He nodded. Brief. The way people do when grief has been processed into something they carry quietly. My father is also gone, Oma offered. 3 years. Heart. He looked up from the food. I'm sorry too. They sat in that for a moment, 2 people who had lost the same kind of irreplaceable thing, and the air between them did something neither of them tried to name. He would have found this hilarious, Oma said finally, smiling a little. Me, in Seoul, fake engaged to a mafia boss. I prefer business executive. I prefer rich criminal, but okay. He laughed. It was a short laugh, half surprised, like he'd lost control of it, but it changed his entire face. Carved away the coldness. Made him look younger and less like a man who'd decided warmth was a liability. Oma looked down at her food quickly. Do not, she thought. She underlined it again. Mentally. Very firmly. It didn't help. The dress fit like it had been made for her. That was the first alarming thing. Alma stood in front of the mirror in the suite's dressing room and stared at herself, and had one of those moments that you can never fully explain to another person, where you look at your own reflection and something in you says, oh. The dress was ivory, not white, which was the right choice for her deep brown skin. It had long sleeves made of sheer embroidered lace, a sweetheart neckline that was romantic without being excessive, and a skirt that fell in clean, elegant lines to the floor. Someone had thought carefully about this dress. Someone had thought carefully about her. It was custom-made, said Minji, the quietly efficient woman who had appeared at the suite door at 7 a.m. to do Alma's hair and makeup. Mr. Park commissioned it 2 days ago. 2 days ago. Before Alma had even agreed. Alma filed that information away under things to interrogate later and let Minji work her magic. Senegalese twists pinned up into an elaborate updo, with a few loose pieces framing her face, and makeup that understood the difference between pretty and radiant. When Minji finished, Alma looked at herself again. She looked like someone's bride. She looked like his bride. This is a job, she whispered to her reflection. Her reflection looked unconvinced. Park Jae-won was waiting in the living room when she emerged. He was in a suit. Of course he was in a suit. The man breathed differently in a suit. This one black, with a white shirt open one button at the collar and no tie, which was the exact right amount of deliberate dishevelment. His hair was pushed back from his face. He looked, objectively speaking, like a crisis. He turned when he heard her. And stopped. Alma watched something move across his face, something he immediately rearranged into composure, but not before she caught it. Not before it lodged itself somewhere in her chest like a splinter she was going to be feeling for a very long time. The dress works, he said finally. High praise from someone of so few words, she replied. He crossed the room toward her, and before she could prepare herself, he reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. It was such a small gesture. It was a fiancé gesture. It was a we have history gesture. Her entire nervous system staged a protest. You ready? He asked. His voice was quiet. Up close, his eyes were not just dark. They were layered deep, like looking into water that went further than you'd expected. Born ready, she said. Her voice was steady. She was very proud of her voice. He offered his arm. She took it. And they walked out into the Seoul morning together, toward a wedding that would change everything. The Park family estate was not a house. It was a statement. Set in the hills above the city, behind iron gates and immaculate gardens, it was the kind of place that said old money in a tone that could not be argued with. Cherry trees lined the driveway. Men in dark suits stood at intervals that Alma recognized immediately as security positions. This was not a family. This was a structure. Alma tightened her grip on Jae-won's arm almost imperceptibly. He covered her hand with his. The first person we'll meet is my aunt, Mrs. Song, he said quietly, as their car moved through the gates. She will embrace you. Don't be startled. I'm Ghanaian, Alma said. We hug everyone. I'll be fine. She will also compliment your dress and then mention her daughter's wedding. I'll admire the daughter's taste and redirect to yours. She will ask about children. 3, Alma said firmly. We've decided. The first one is named after your mother. His hand tightened over hers. She glanced at him. His jaw was working slightly, like something inside him had shifted. What was her name? Alma asked softly. Soo-yun, he said. Her name was Soo-yun. It's a beautiful name, Alma said. He said nothing. But he didn't let go of her hand. The grandmother was the one Alma hadn't been briefed on. She was small, ancient, and sharp-eyed in a way that made Alma feel immediately that pretending was going to be significantly more difficult than anticipated. She stood at the entrance to the estate's great room with the authority of a woman who had outlasted everyone who had ever underestimated her. She looked at Alma for a long, measuring moment. Then she spoke in Korean. Jae-won leaned to translate, but Alma touched his arm lightly. I've got this, and turned to the grandmother with a calm smile. She used one of the 3 phrases she had practiced the night before in the bathroom, for 45 minutes. I have heard so much about you, and none of it was enough. The grandmother blinked. Then she laughed, a real laugh, sharp and delighted, and grabbed Omma's face in both hands and said something to Jae-won that made him go very still. "What did she say?" Omma murmured. His voice was low, almost undone. "She said, 'This one is real. Don't lose her.'" Omma felt the floor do something unreliable beneath her feet. "Okay," she said very quietly. "Okay." This was a job. This was a job. The wedding ceremony itself was breathtaking. Jae-won's cousin, a laughing, gentle man named Hyun-soo, was marrying a woman named Yuna who clearly thought he was the greatest thing that had ever happened to the world, and watching them was doing something inconvenient to Omma's carefully maintained professional objectivity. She sat beside Jae-won in the front row, their thighs barely touching, his arm along the back of her chair in the universal language of "she is mine," and tried to focus on the logistics of the ceremony, the timing, the florals, the positioning, the way she always did at weddings. Instead she kept noticing his profile. She kept noticing how he watched his cousin with an expression that was quieter and more tender than anything she'd seen on his face yet. Like he had soft places he kept carefully hidden, and weddings were the only things that found them. "Stop it," she told herself. She looked at the flowers. The flowers were gorgeous. Very professional. Excellent ribbon work. "You're analyzing the floral arrangements," Jae-won said, very quietly, close to her ear. "I am absolutely not." "You tilted your head. You do that when you're assessing something." Omma turned to look at him, startled. "You've noticed that?" He looked back at her steadily. "I notice a lot of things." The air between them was doing that thing again. That thing. That thing she had underlined 3 times and was very aggressively not acknowledging. She looked back at the ceremony. Her heart was performing completely unreasonable acrobatics. Park Sr., Jae-won's father, was, as promised, formidable. He was tall, white-haired, and had the same sharp jaw as his son, along with the additional quality of someone who had spent decades commanding rooms and had long ago stopped being impressed by anything. He found them at the reception, during the cocktail hour, with the energy of a man who had been tracking them the whole time and had simply decided now was optimal. "So," he said in Korean, and then looked at Omma with deliberate exclusion, "she is the African woman." "She is the woman I plan to marry," Jae-won replied in Korean, his voice flat. "There is a difference." Omma smiled pleasantly and said, also in Korean, "He also plans to cook for me on Sundays, which I feel says more about his character than his business does." Park Sr. stared at her. Jae-won made a sound that was heroically not a laugh. "You speak Korean," his father said. "A little," Omma said, in English this time, sweetly. "Enough." He studied her for a long moment. Then he looked at his son with something that was not quite approval, but was adjacent to it in the way that stubborn men who have been surprised approach new information. "Her eyes are honest," he said to Jae-won, in Korean. "Whatever else she is, her eyes are honest." "I know," Jae-won said. "That's why." Omma didn't understand all of it. But she caught honest. And she caught the way Jae-won said "I know," like it wasn't new information, like he had already decided something. Park Sr. moved on. Omma exhaled. "You were spectacular," Jae-won said quietly. "I know," she said, because she was not going to let him see how her hands were trembling slightly beneath her bouquet. "I told you. I'm good under pressure." "Yes." He was looking at her again with that expression she couldn't catalogue. "You did tell me." The almost kiss happened on the terrace. There was dancing inside and noise, and Jae-won's aunt had already asked about the children twice, and Omma had slipped out for air in the way she always did at events, finding the quiet edge of things to breathe in. He found her there. Of course he did. He leaned on the railing beside her, both of them looking out over the estate gardens in the early evening light, Seoul glittering beyond the hills. "How are you doing?" he asked. Not a performance question. A real one. Honestly. She looked at him sideways. "Your family is extraordinary." "They're complicated." "Complicated families usually are extraordinary," she said. "The boring ones are simple." He smiled. That catastrophic smile again. "Your family?" he asked. "Chaos," she said warmly. "Complete, beautiful, loud chaos." My mother has opinions about everything and delivers them at volume. My grandmother still calls me by my childhood name in public. My brother texts me memes at 3 a.m. and acts offended if I don't respond. She paused. I miss them constantly. You should call them. I will. When I'm not pretending to be someone's fiancé in the Korean hills. He turned to face her fully. The light was doing something unfair to his face. Amma, he said. She looked up at him. Thank you, he said. Not for the performance. For, he paused, looking for the word, which was unusual for a man who seemed to always know exactly what he meant. For being present. For being real, inside of all the pretending. Amma looked at him for a long moment. She said, you know this is a job. Yes. And she checked the time, approximately 16 hours, I go back to my actual life and you go back to yours. Yes. So whatever this is, she gestured vaguely between them, we should probably not. Probably not, he agreed. Neither of them moved. He reached out and tucked that same strand of hair back again. His thumb stayed at her cheekbone a moment longer than strictly necessary. Amma's entire cardiovascular system issued a formal complaint. Jae-won, she said softly. Yes. If you don't stop touching my face, I'm going to do something professionally inadvisable. Then I'll stop, he said. And didn't move his hand. Great plan, she whispered. Someone called his name from inside. The moment fractured. He stepped back. She turned to the garden. Both of them pretended they were entirely fine. They were absolutely not fine. The next morning came with a sunrise that had no business being so beautiful given what was about to happen. They had stayed up too late, at the reception, and then after, back at the estate in a quiet sitting room where someone brought tea and they talked until past midnight about everything and nothing. His childhood in Seoul. Her years building her business in Accra, then London, then the world. His mother's garden. Her father's laugh. The strange, specific loneliness of being excellent at your work and uncertain about everything else. At some point the conversation had gone quiet and comfortable in the way that only happens with people you have known much longer than 48 hours, and Amma had thought, this is the most dangerous thing that has happened to me in this country, and I walked into a Mafia estate today. They did not almost kiss again. They maintained their professionally appropriate distance. They also did not stop looking at each other when they thought the other person wasn't watching. The ceremony, the actual wedding ceremony, the formal one, held in the estate's cathedral chapel, was scheduled for 11 a.m. Amma was dressed at 9. She had helped 3 of Jae-won's female cousins manage minor wardrobe crises before 10, because she literally could not help herself, and they had adopted her with the enthusiasm of women who recognized competence immediately. At 10:45, Jae-won collected her from the cousin's suite. He stopped in the doorway. He did the thing again, where his composure rearranged itself quickly but not quite quickly enough. Stop looking at me like that, she said. Like what? Like I'm solving a problem you didn't know you had. A pause. Then, I'll try. He offered his arm. She took it. They walked into the chapel. The ceremony was in full motion. Vows being exchanged, 200 guests seated, flowers and candlelight and all the things that made Amma's professional heart sing, when the cathedral doors opened. Not gently. Not with ceremony. They opened like something was arriving. The room felt it before it processed it. A collective stillness. Heads turning. The priest losing his rhythm for a fraction of a second. Amma felt Jae-won go rigid beside her. She turned. The woman in the doorway was Korean, beautiful, composed, and wearing an ivory lace wedding dress. An identical ivory lace wedding dress. She stood at the back of the cathedral with the posture of someone who had decided something irreversible, and her eyes moved through the room with precision until they found Park Jae-won. Then they found Amma. And Amma, who had planned events in natural disasters, who had managed crises that would break lesser people, who had never panicked, felt something cold move through her chest. Because the way this woman was looking at Jae-won was not the look of a stranger. It was the look of a woman who had already lost something and had come back to reclaim it. The room was completely silent. 200 dangerous men held their breath. Amma turned to Jae-won. He was looking at the woman in the door with an expression she couldn't read, something complex and guarded and very still. Jae-won, Oma said, her voice low and controlled and betraying absolutely nothing of the thing collapsing quietly inside her. You have exactly 3 seconds to explain this before I cause an international incident. He turned to her. And the look on his face, something fractured and urgent and almost desperate, was its own kind of answer. He leaned down, his lips at her ear. Trust me, please. Now. She stared at him. 200 people watched. The woman at the back of the cathedral began walking forward. And Omar Asante, who had never made a decision without knowing all the variables, who had built her entire life on information and preparation and control, looked into the eyes of a man she had known for 2 days and felt something in her chest say yes before her brain could vote. She turned to face the approaching woman. She straightened her spine to her full height. She lifted her chin. And she became, in that moment, the most convincing bride anyone in that room had ever seen. Hello, she said, in a voice so calm it rewrote the physics of the room. She reached up and took Jae-won's hand. She felt him exhale. I don't think we've met. I'm Oma, Jae-won's fiancée. A pause. And you are? The woman stopped 3 feet away. Her eyes flicked between them. Calculating. Reassessing. I'm Ji-yun, the woman said quietly. His ex-fiancée. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Oma had ever heard. Jae-won's grip on her hand tightened. Not in apology. In something else, something that felt impossibly like please don't leave. Oma did not leave. She smiled. Well, she said. What a lovely dress. Ji-yun did not cause a scene. That was, somehow, more alarming than if she had. She looked at them both, Oma's hand in Jae-won's, Oma's expression of absolute serenity, Jae-won's stillness beside her, and something in her face moved through a full conversation with itself and came out the other side resolved. I made a mistake, she said to Jae-won. Quietly. Directly. I needed you to know. Ji-yun, Jae-won said. His voice was careful and not unkind. This is not the place. I know. Her eyes moved to Oma. I'm sorry. For the disruption. A pause. She seems real. She is, Jae-won said. More real than most things. Oma's heart did something complicated and kept its own counsel. Ji-yun nodded once. She turned. She walked back through the cathedral doors with the same composure with which she'd arrived, and one of Jae-won's men, materializing silently from the perimeter, followed her out. The cathedral exhaled. The priest, a man of admirable professionalism, cleared his throat and continued as though nothing had happened. The ceremony resumed. The cousin and his bride exchanged their vows with slightly wider eyes and considerably more stories to tell at anniversaries. Jae-won did not let go of Oma's hand for the rest of the ceremony. She did not pull it away. After, in the chaos of the reception resuming, guests finding their footing again, the dramatic tension dissolving into champagne and relief, Oma found a quiet corridor and stood in it alone. She needed 30 seconds. She was entitled to 30 seconds. She had just held the line in a Mafia cathedral in Seoul, Korea, while his ex-fiancée walked in wearing her dress, and she had done it with a smile and a one-liner and absolute composure, and now she was in a corridor having a very private moment of what is happening to my life. You're processing, said Jae-won's voice from behind her. She turned. He was leaning against the opposite wall, jacket unbuttoned now, arms crossed, watching her with that infuriating attentive expression. I'm composing myself, she corrected. Same thing. It is not. He pushed off the wall and walked toward her slowly. He stopped close, closer than professionally necessary, closer than the contract had accounted for, and looked down at her with an expression that had shed its armor somewhere in the last 4 hours. Ji-yun and I were engaged for a year, he said quietly. She ended it because she didn't want the life. The danger. The weight of what I am. A pause. She wasn't wrong. Oma looked up at him. But she came back. Yes. Why did you say trust me? Because I needed you to stay, he said simply. Because if you'd stepped away, I would have understood. But I didn't want you to. His jaw worked slightly. I haven't wanted anyone to stay in a very long time. Alma studied him. This man who had found her in a café and remade her weak and given her a grandmother who said this one is real and an almost kiss on a terrace and a grip on her hand that still hadn't quite let go even though they were in a corridor and no one was watching. My contract ends tomorrow morning, she said. Yes. I go back to Accra. Or London. Or wherever the next event takes me. Yes. And you stay here, running your business organization. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. I need to know something, she said. Honestly. Not for the performance. For me. Ask. Was any of it real? The things you said last night. The way you, she gestured vaguely, the way you've been. With me. Is that Park Jae-won or is that the role? He didn't answer immediately. Which was its own kind of answer, because she had come to understand that he didn't waste words and he didn't perform more than required and everything he did was deliberate. He reached out and cupped her face in both hands. Alma, he said. Yes. Everything that was real is the part I'm terrified of. She breathed. He breathed. I want to extend the contract, he said. She blinked. To when? Indefinitely. The word sat between them, enormous and impossible and absolutely sincere. Alma Asante, who had planned other people's love stories for years and never believed she'd stumble into her own in a Seoul cafe, looked at this man. This complicated, dangerous, catastrophically handsome man who noticed when she tilted her head and kept her hand and said trust me and meant it, and felt something in her chest unlock. That is a ridiculous proposal, she said. Yes. I don't even know your middle name. Sunghyun. Park Sunghyun Jae-won. She tested it. Okay. Okay. I'll stay through the week, she said. We renegotiate after. He almost smiled. Almost. That's acceptable. And I want full disclosure about the business organization. All of it. That will take more than a week. Then I guess you'd better start talking. He did smile then. Fully. Catastrophically. He leaned down, slowly, deliberately, giving her every opportunity to step back, and kissed her. It was not a performance kiss. It was the kind of kiss that arrives with its bags already packed and fully intends to stay. Alma kissed him back and thought, I was never going to be able to underline this enough. They didn't talk about Ji-yeon for 2 days. When they finally did, over dinner at a restaurant in Itaewon where they were just 2 people and not a mafia boss and his fake fiancé turned something real, Jae-won told her everything. Ji-yeon had not simply been an ex. She had been, more specifically, the reason the family had been pressuring him for a new partner for 2 years. And she had not simply walked back into the cathedral out of love. She had walked in with information. Information about someone in the Park family who was not what they appeared. Someone who had been feeding intelligence to a rival organization for 14 months. Someone who had known that Jae-won would have a woman beside him at the wedding. Someone who had been watching. Alma put down her chopsticks. Let me understand this, she said slowly. There is a mole in your family. Yes. And Ji-yeon came to the wedding to warn you. Yes. In the most dramatic way possible because she still has feelings for you and also wanted to see if I was real. Yes. And the mole, Alma paused, knows about me now. Silence. Jae-won's expression had gone back to the controlled, dangerous version, the one she had seen in the beginning, before he had let her inside the edges of him. Jae-won. Yes. Does the mole consider me a loose end? A pause that was 1 second too long. We're working on it, he said. Alma picked her chopsticks back up. She took a very deliberate bite of her food. She chewed. She swallowed. Okay, she said calmly. Then I need you to tell me everything. From the beginning. All of it. Every name, every deal, every person who might want to use me to get to you. He looked at her. Alma. I walked into your world with 2 days' notice and a contract and I held the line in a cathedral, she said. I am not a liability. I am an asset. But I need the full picture. She met his eyes steadily. Partners tell each other the truth. Partners. Something moved through his expression. Something that settled, like a decision being made. All right, he said quietly. From the beginning. From the beginning. She nodded. She looked at him across the table, in this restaurant, in this city, in this life that was no longer even slightly what she had planned. She felt completely, terrifyingly, irrevocably alive. Also, she said, I'm calling my mother after dinner to tell her I'm extending the trip. What will you tell her? Alma considered this. I'll tell her I met someone, she said. She'll scream for 6 minutes and then ask if he can cook. I can cook, Jae-won said. Then you're going to be her favorite person in the world. Alma paused. Mine too, potentially. But don't tell her that yet. She'll book a flight and arrive before we've figured out what we're doing. He laughed. And she filed it away, the sound of it, the way it changed his face, the way it felt like something she intended to collect more of. Outside, Seoul glittered. Somewhere in the Park family, a mole was watching. Somewhere across the world, Alma's mother was about to have a very interesting evening. And across the dinner table, Park Jae-won reached out and took Alma's hand the way he had been doing for 2 days. Quietly, deliberately, like she was something real he had decided to hold on to. She turned her hand over and held his back. 3 days later, a black envelope arrived at their hotel suite. Inside was a single photograph. Alma. Taken from a distance. At the café in Insadong. Before she had ever met Jae-won. Before he had found her. Before the contract. Before any of it. Someone had been watching her before the beginning. Someone had chosen her. And on the back of the photograph, in careful handwriting. Ask him why he was really in that café. Collision. End of Part 1. Collision. She thought she walked into his world by chance. But what if there was no such thing as chance? What if Alma was chosen, and Jae-won has been lying about the one thing that matters most? Part 2 is going to break you. Subscribe, drop a comment, and tell me, do you think he planned it from the beginning? And if he did, is it still love?